the arc of sort of how I'm here right now goes back to about 1953. I was way before I was born, when President Dwight Eisenhower, as a tactical response on his part and some of his advisors' part, dealing with after the second or possibly before, maybe after the third meeting that he had with extraterrestrials back in the 1952-1953 timeframe, where he felt that the MJ-12 committee and other agencies that were sort of wrangling the extraterrestrial issue was not in the best hands, and the speech that he gives warning everybody about the military-industrial complex is very proof positive of what Ike's attitude towards the complex had become, that it was sort of its own dangerous entity that needed to be watched over, and that he was warning people about. But he did more than just give a casual warning to everybody when he left office. In the late 1953 timeframe, he signed a secret executive order signing the United States Marine Corps Special Section Special Code into law, which essentially mandated the creation of this covert branch of the military, which would be specifically created to be a military intelligence apparatus to assess information and collate all data about the extraterrestrial issue, any exopolitical issues, as well as to provide military support to other agencies or for crashes, emergency situations, possible threat assessments, and so forth, in a way that Ike felt that the intelligence agencies themselves were not really to be trusted because they're a bunch of spies and spooks, and so they're by nature sort of shifty and backstabby and kind of not to be trusted, even when they're supposedly on your side. So he felt that creating a military organization where you would have an officer corps that was beholden to oaths and had a military background, so that it would be more disciplined and it would be more structured towards a code and a law and a legal framework, instead of just, the sort of intelligence framework, which was how do we get this done irregardless of, what's really legal, because we sort of presume that we have the mandate to do whatever we want, because we're, defending the national security. But he felt that a military organization would also have that mandate to defend national security, but would have a legal framework that would, and this is again way back then, so hopefully back then would produce an agency that over time would be better to defend the rights and legal responsibilities of the Constitution, and understanding that there was this rogue framework that was probably just going to become a crazier and crazier monster over time. If there was some counterbalance, then we might not be completely at a loss some decades later when this sort of problem explodes, because you might actually have at that point a fully equipped and entrenched military intelligence organization, which is actually which would, rather than have the secrecy situation, which has become its own security threat, would have legal authority restored to the legislative, executive, and, observation of the people, and let people vote on sort of how we deal with things and what our sort of response to certain issues is, bring it into democracy, because that essentially is the only way in which everyone's interests are protected. And if you do something other than that, you're essentially leaning towards some kind of authoritarian fascism or something, which, not to get on a soapbox, but, as Americans, we've spent far too many conflicts and far too many lives fighting things that were directly, military authoritative and fascist, to just become fascists ourselves. I don't think that's okay. I think any American and any soldier who sees that twisty-turny path should really understand that if we allow this to occur, allow, sort of the American system to become completely fascist like the systems that we struggled against last century, then everybody's lives that were sacrificed is for nothing. And I think that that's a pretty big black eye. And most of us are not okay with that, and are willing to step up to a place of saying, all right, fine, we'll put our lives on the line, and we'll step up and do what we have to do and what our duty demands, in order to prevent fascism on our own shores, which, and cloaked in kind of American flag and nationalism, it's here in its own way, and it's become a serious problem. Right there, I'll interject. My favorite quote from Benito Mussolini, which is a guy who knows a thing or two about fascism, is that he just simple quote. He said, corporatism is a much better, more accurate word than fascism, and that's really
right.
what we should call it. So understanding that, fascism is this mystery word that a lot of people don't really understand, but it's essentially just giving power to the banks and the corporations and selling out everybody else's interests. And that doesn't ever end well. And I think we can certainly look at the current situation that we're in and see how it's not going well at all, as long as we continue to go down that path, and that some kind of turnaround is a good idea. So long introduction there about why there should be a military intelligence apparatus that Ike wanted there to be, created back in 1953, that would hope bring sort of legal, ethical balance to the exopolitical extraterrestrial issue. Fingers crossed that, that's gone as well as I say that it is, because really we don't have much other evidence other than, my word for it at this point. But let's, fingers crossed, believe that I'm got the right information and that it is going as well as or at least as a counterbalance to the situation that makes it more hopeful than hopeless, which is, part of my job here. So, super quickly. So, United States Marine Corps Special Section was created for that purpose. And over the period of the next decade and a half, it became involved in all of these covert technology programs. And so when the main genetic engineering technology started to really enter into the super soldier programs, which is about the mid-1960s, Special Section realized from looking at other super soldier programs that there was kind of a flaw in the way that everyone was approaching it, which was damaging the soldiers, damaging their psyches, and essentially making them not really good use of material, but it was what they felt was necessary to do in order to get people to commit to any order at any time, essentially kill anybody anytime, point the finger, and they'll do it without asking questions.
Well, Randy, one question. So the program that you were in, it really got started, am I hearing this correctly, in the 1960s?
Correct. It was formulated about the mid-late 1960s as a response to what they felt was not good use of this technology in the other super soldier programs. So I try to make a distinction when talking about the program that I was in. The other programs, to oversimplify, which is something that's really complicated, I think maybe this helps a little. The other programs we kind of refer to as the against the grain, because you really have to go against the grain of the human condition in order to turn people into murder machines. To get them to kill on command is really not human nature. Human beings can be very aggressive, and we will defend our families and our communities and so forth with, vicious, aggression when necessary. But to just turn everybody into killing sociopaths on command is really against human nature in a pretty serious way. So forcing people to do that is sort of going against the grain. So the program that I was in really wanted to devise a different way of doing this, which we call the with the grain sort of technology, which instead of trying to turn someone into a murderer that kills on command, you use the natural condition of the desire for, especially, alpha males to defend their packs, to defend their communities, to defend their tribes, to defend their species, to use that natural mechanism to create, a super soldier fighting machine that will not, just when you snap your fingers do what you want it to do, but essentially will have the conditioning and the programming and the training to do its job, which is to defend and protect its planet and its people. So you don't necessarily have to keep it on a leash all the time and a shot collar all the time and beat it all the time, which again damages the psyche, damages the body, shortens the lifespan of the soldier, makes them less effective, not to mention causing negative psionic ripples of dark energy and, that we don't want to weave into the fabric of our society. I think we can look over time and see when we weave negativity into our society, it has a negative impact. And it gives us a negative output. We have a negative civilization and negative society. When we weave positive things into our society, the whole sow what you reap thing, it plays out. So this is one of those cases where certain people might want to justify the use of this military technology, but to be honest, it's just a bad idea on every level. So one of the main things I want to point out, I was made a little differently, and we encourage that if we're going to have to use this technology, then we have to consider the damage to the people that we're doing this to, because that's unconscionable and sends, again, a bad ripple through civilization. And that you get a more effective, more intelligent, longer lasting, less likely to be a ticking time bomb super soldier experience when you don't break them first, essentially. You know, if you construct them and build them to be super and not just killing machine, they will actually be super. And you actually get a longer, better result for that, and you get more effectiveness as a defensive military tool, just in that pure pragmatism. So in the mid-late 1960s, Project Moonshadow, the program that I was created under, was formed sometime between about 1967 and the mid-1969. My genetic code was engineered from the ground up, and then I was engineered from the ground up, implanted into my mother's womb without her knowledge via some form of abduction, and raised by my parents in a normal social environment. Also, one of the things that the program we were trying to do, you know, sort of with the grain, understood that a healthy, stable family environment was actually more desirable than dysfunctional, destabilizing family environment. So the whole goal of trying to put me into a family environment that would be stable and functional, and sort of with a sort of ethical, moral guideline was part of the plan. And so I can say confidently, my parents are great people. They were good parents, and I still love them to pieces. They're fabulous people. They get older and older, but they're wonderful, and really gave me every opportunity as a child and an adolescent to experience life in a positive way, and to experience myself in a positive way, and to have a spiritual experience that I could define in a positive way, and how I could learn to stand up for things and tell the truth, and you know, sort of be the person that I am. So I feel very fortunate in that sense, that I had great parents who unwittingly were a part of a project that they didn't know. I mean, we've had this discussion since. I've given them the briefing, and they've been very supportive. They're wonderful people. They were a little like, oh, well, we always knew something was up, but that explains everything, you know. But for many, many years, I simply was keeping my secrecy oaths and not telling them. And then as I was released from that recently, I've been able to tell them and other folks, and obviously go completely public with my name and my face. So I was born in 1970, created a genetically engineered super soldier from the ground up. I was trained throughout my adolescence and my teenage years until I was 17 years old. Mostly this is a nocturnal event where I go to sleep and someone comes into my bedroom via localized wormhole technology, what some people often refer to as a teleportation technology, but you know, it's not exactly like transporter beam. So because there's a little portal or a door that has to come open, I kind of specify that it's localized wormhole technology. So one or two people would come through, wake me up, escort me through, and we would do whatever the training situation was that particular evening. Now, I know it starts to throw a curveball at people when we say time travel as a factor, because a lot of people are like, wait a minute, we don't have that. You know, the Nazis were working on that technology in the 40s. We were working on the technology in the 40s. So we've really been cracking the time travel technology code for decades. It is absolutely some of the most classified and compartmentalized technology of all the covert technology. So even among people in the covert space program, the guys in Time Corps who have access to the really good time traveling equipment and, or, you know, have the time travel maps and have it all mapped out and everything, that's a whole nother level of secrecy and a whole nother level of what's going on that I know very, very little about, other than that it exists. And the military sections rely on the Time Corps guys to do all that plotting. So anytime you're transporting personnel, vehicles, and so forth, and there's a time factor, just like, you know, when you're in a plane, you report to the FAA that you're going somewhere, you file a flight plan, you do the same thing with the Time Corps. Time Corps plots it all out on their equipment, and then, you know, gives you instructions where and when and what way you go and get there, and what time frames you're allowed to use and how you're able to bend and use time. So that, for instance, in one singular evening, where as often as the case this occurs between 2:30 and 4:30 a.m., and this is a consistent thing. I know a lot of other people who have military abductee or abduction experiences, and it's very consistently between like the sort of 2:30, 3:30, 4:30 a.m. time frame. That, let's say, you know, someone comes in at 3 a.m. and then I come back at 3:15. But I've been away for a week, 10 days,
Right.
30 days, because that was the training period. And the Time Corps guys, like I said, they plotted that course. So that's called a quantum dilation. When you have that extension of time that essentially gets crammed into a shorter frame of time when you're talking about your main timeline, that's called a quantum dilation. And so
when you
Like,
came back, did you have any memory of going away and doing the training? Or when you came back, no memory?
interestingly enough, there was residual memory, but it's, when you're a kid, there's still this sort of during the day, daytime things, normal life happens. When you go to bed at night, weird things happen, dreams happen, and all kinds of strange things can occur. So when you're experiencing something or have a memory of something that's so outside of your normal daytime experience, it's really easy to just quantify and compartmentalize it and say, oh, I had a funny dream. So most of the time, I would just consistently have said, "Wow, I sure do have a lot of funny dreams that seem to go on and 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 on before I wake up again." But and because of the programming, I knew not to really discuss it. So I sort of just felt as a kid, this is what's happening in my dream space at night. So I don't need to talk about it to anybody. But I certainly remember, quite a bit of what was going
So
on.
you weren't making an obvious correlation. You were thinking as a kid, this is a dream state. I had a crazy lucid dream last night, and that was the extent of it.
Pretty much. Now, even though there were also occasions when I would wake up with mysterious bruises, cuts, scars, burns, which again, I would go, wow, where did that come from? And, take a serious moment to puzzle and go, well, I wasn't there last night, and I don't know how that happened, rolling around in bed last night, and sometimes in very strange and strategic locations. But again, you know, that was not something to explain away by the sort of daytime existence of what reality is. So I would just kind of scratch my head and take it and go, huh, put it on the back burner because I felt like if anything I really didn't understand when I was young, I could always put it on the back burner and come back to it later. I didn't feel like I had to really struggle if I didn't completely understand something as a kid. I would just go, huh, well, I don't completely understand that. I'll put it over here and come back to it later. And most often I would just put it on a back burner mentally and never really come back to it, except think about it once in a while or, ponder once in a while. Oh, remember that weird thing that happened and those weird bruises.
Did your parents ever ask? Were they aware of the bruises or the cuts?
Sometimes, a couple times that I showed them, and even a couple of times they decided they were concerned enough that they scheduled a doctor appointment to go see the doctor and have them looked at, or have it looked at by our family physician, which, interestingly enough, the time that I went in, I had these bruises on the inside of my thighs, like, a couple finger lengths on either side of my genitals in exactly the same spot, exactly the same size, perfectly round, like a hematoma, like I'd either been given a shot or had a blood draw from right there. And went to go see the family doctor, and I could have been, I'm 11 or 12 years old. I was just a kid, but, junior high. And she took a look at these bruises and proceeded to give me a 15-minute lecture on the dangers of steroid use. So she clearly thought that they were hematomas because she gave me a lecture like she thought that I was shooting myself up with something in order to give me that lecture. But I was so shocked that she was having this conversation with me about something I understood nothing about.
How old were you?
11,
Yeah,
12.
okay. That's kind of an odd discussion to have with a.
I thought so.
Yeah,
And like, I mean, I'd heard of steroids at that age,
right.
like I knew that they existed and maybe people cheated in sports with them, but any notion of how I get them or that how you would administer them or why I would want to use them or, oh my God, at 11 or 12 years old, if someone said, you'll get big and strong if you shoot this needle into your leg, I'd be like, I'm not shooting any needles into myself at any age, but certainly not at 11 or 12. It was just very silly. So I was just so shocked that she's sitting there having this conversation with me. I just kind of sat there, dumbfounded, eyes wide open, nodding, okay, okay, and you be done, and I'm gonna get out of here.
Yeah.
And that was such a negative experience. I felt like I wasn't being listened to, I wasn't being taken seriously, and I was being completely misjudged for whatever was happening. I wasn't encouraged to want to go back to the doctor anytime I had a strange burn or a strange scar or a strange experience. Now, I had a really fascinating high school chemistry physics teacher who was this old JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab burnout. Like he had been in aerospace for a number of years and just got tired of, the rat race of aerospace and helped work on like satellite stuff and early space program stuff and laser stuff. Really cool guy, Earl Fullerton. Anyway, he was sort of, I'm not quite retired yet, going to teach high school, chemistry and stuff. Really nice guy. And I had these very strange burns that had just sort of appeared in like these six different sort of weird strategic locations across my body. And I was talking to him about them. I was just happening to talk about them. I said, I've had a couple chemical burns in chemistry class before, so I know what that's like. And this doesn't seem like a chemical burn. And I know I haven't been exposed to like any weird heat source that I burn myself strategically, or don't have a curling iron, or anything like that. And I'm really confused at where these, what appear to be burns, could be coming from. And him being the sort of, super genius photographic memory guy, just offhandedly says, well, could be radiation burns. And I sniffed back like, well, I haven't been around or exposed to any radiation. And he snapped back, and I thought you were paying attention in class. Radiation's invisible. How would you know? And when he said that, it just, hit this, I'd like dung a bell in my head, and I just had to go, oh yeah, I wouldn't necessarily know. So I didn't have any other explanation for where these burns could have come from except some kind of unknown source of localized radiation that left these perfectly little round, about the size of an eraser tip burns. One right here, one right there, on the ends of my elbows, on the outside of my kneecaps, and then on the outside of my ankles, and then one on my sternum.
Let me ask you, Randy, for a second, if we back up 1 second. This is very, very interesting. If we step back, we talk about the program itself. This program was done in parallel. In other words, it was outside of Majestic 12, MJ-12?
Correct, correct. It's part of United States Marine Corps Special Section, which, there's cooperative effort between MJ-12, but it was a USMC Special Section program. Correct.
Okay, so now some people are going to ask, how did this coexist? Who was responsible for overseeing your program? Was it the president? Was it outside the presidency? Do you even know?
Well, I can tell you what I understand from the United States Marine Corps Special Section Special Code, which is the sort of the legal framework for the operation of USMC Special Section. So Special Section is supposed to, it has its own officer cadre, which answers to the Special Section Code, and its own O's, which are of military officers, and they are supposed to directly answer to the president, correct? Because Eisenhower signed in a secret executive order mandating their creation and mandating a chain of communication that was supposed to go between him and the president. Now, I would say that over time, I can't say that chain of communication has been kept as open as they would have liked to in the early days, because I think over time, the MJ-12 committee was doing such a whitewashing job to any of the presidents that were coming in, that anything that any of the USMC Special Section officers tried to do as far as communicating would have been seen as directly contradictory and possibly even threatening to whatever MJ-12 is doing. So if MJ-12 was saying, no, we got to keep the president in the dark, but then decades ago, USMC Special Section was really taking a stand at that point saying, no, that might have been really problematic back then. It was much more chaotic back then. I think that's more the stand that they're taking now. And I think that the president has been briefed, but is still in a really tight situation as far as, it's like a Jenga game. If you pull the wrong stick, the whole thing is going to just explode, and someone's going to go, if I can't have it, nobody can. And it's going to be this crazy disaster, because to sort of answer your question now, it's more complicated than just the MJ-12 committee and United States Marine Corps Special Section. What happened was, as early as the military intelligence agencies realized that there was a serious extraterrestrial, exopolitical, technological question, anybody who was smart enough to rub two brain cells together realized, if I get my hand on that technology before anybody else does, I will have the biggest ace up my sleeve in the world. So it was not a secret that the first guy that has a spaceship with a disintegration beam and everyone else is driving around prop planes, or we haven't even developed jets, or we're just developing jets, and you've got a flying saucer with a particle beam weapon on it, guess what? You win. You don't just win the war, you win everything, because that's a leap of technology that makes somebody else's air force just irrelevant. So when you have that far of a leap of technology, it's a huge, huge, huge tactical advantage. And and I would say this is an example to anyone who thinks that may not be true. Um, a single squad of say 12 or 16 soldiers, Marines, let's call them, contemporary Marines with contemporary battle gear, okay? And let's just say a fairly unlimited amount of ammunition, so it's not going to matter how many rounds they have to drop, could pretty much win the Civil War single-handedly with 12 guys, because you could get farther away and fire more bullets more accurately, and there'd be no way that a 500 guys with muskets could take out 12 guys with sniper rifles and rifles that can shoot accurately hundreds of yards with night vision goggles. It wouldn't happen. 12 guys could win the entire Civil War, or win the entire Spanish-American War, or you go back far enough and it would, those same 12 guys could tip any balance of any conflict in the world, because that technology would be so much farther advanced than anything anybody else has got. You go back to, the Roman legion, it wouldn't be able to stand a chance. You can still only fire arrows and catapults, so
Right.
far, but bullets can go farther. So that level of technology leap that we were talking about happening in the 40s, they realized whoever gets this is going to win the whole kabam. So essentially, every military intelligence agency became its own apparatus for trying to absorb this information. And what I call it is the cold Civil War of the 40s, 50s, and 60s was not, the Western apparatus against the Eastern Russian apparatus or any such thing. It was every military intelligence apparatus against every other military intelligence apparatus to secure the ET and exopolitical technology.
Where did technology come from, Randy? Because that's my question is, how long has the technology been there? When did it first come about?
Well, certainly from what we know, there has been an extraterrestrial presence and connection to planet Earth for as far back as we can go into recorded time. But as far as the modern acquisition of this technology, it can pretty much be targeted to some specific events that occurred in the late 1930s, where extraterrestrials who were in communication with members of the German hierarchy and the German military-industrial complex were acquiring that technology through a, sort of psionic telecommunication program, one of the very, very first sort of 20th century psionic telecommunication programs between extraterrestrials, in order to get some of this propulsion technology and some of this energy generation technology, so that some of the first crude alien reproduction vehicles that the Nazis were building, had some pretty advanced technology, but they weren't going to tip the balance, of the war yet. They really needed to develop some better, faster, stronger air material, as well as their sort of weapon material. But that was happening in the late 30s. We were acquiring the same sort of technology about the same time. That was the invention of high-powered radar. High-powered radar, for the first, maybe decade that it was in operation as a covert technology and as a technology that people were aware of, was responsible for a number of crashes by extraterrestrial vehicles because it messed up their guidance systems. Now, it took them, a little while to adapt to that. So it didn't take only so many crashes for them to realize, hey, we need to adapt our guidance systems to not get interfered so that we think the ground is the sky and crash into the ground, because that's bad and loses material. But there was a period of time there when we just kind of kept knocking them out of the sky accidentally. There were certainly times when we approached them militarily in the sky and tried to shoot them with weapons in the sky and were not successful, and were not able to attack them militarily, and they demonstrated certain military proficiencies above our ability to attack them. But in this case, the high-powered radar knocked a number of them out of the sky, and so the first, broken pieces of material that we got in the 30s and early 40s were enough to get the ball rolling, enough to get people convinced that this was a real thing, and it was not just fantasy comic book stories, and it was the real deal, and whoever got this race first was going to win the whole shebang.
Well, aside from getting the technology, though, having the technology and trying to backwards engineer it is one thing. but was there also assistance by extraterrestrials to make sense of the technology that we had in our hands?
Yeah, absolutely. And then this is one of those situations where you have, again, this division of many, many different agencies and programs that are working on this technology. So, of, let's say, the first dozen programs that were being operated out of the United States military intelligence apparatus, maybe a third or a quarter of them were getting assistance from extraterrestrial scientists. The rest of them were being left to trickle down information that was coming from some of those extraterrestrial scientists and those other scientists' research. But, a lot of those other scientists working on the other projects were still not allowed in the top layers of communication and disclosure of what technology and the extraterrestrial scientists that were communicating with them. So they tried to keep it as tightly compartmentalized as possible. So only a small percentage of the reverse engineering programs were directly communicating with the extraterrestrial scientists, and the rest of them were getting some trickle-down information or just kind of having to sort it out on their own. Or in some cases, over what became, over the next decades, different agencies were approached by different extraterrestrials. Hey, would you like some assistance? We'd like to cut a deal. And as well as different agencies learning how to communicate, started reaching out and getting responses from different extraterrestrial communities and consortiums saying, yeah, let's cut a deal. Let's talk technology trade, information trade. We want to help you. You want to help us, blah, blah, blah. And not always to our benefit. Sometimes, when a carpetbagger comes in and says, if I got a deal for you, it's not really a good deal. And so some of those first deals where someone came in and said, I got a great deal for you, kid, it was a really bad deal, and we had to sort out some bad contracts in the early days.
So this compartmentalization then says that we do have this, lack of a better term, a secret shadow structure, a government complex, whatever word you want to use, that is so compartmentalized that even very high-ranking, let's say, officials within the government, we'll take the U.S. as an example, are not in the loop.
That is absolutely correct. And what you have are, let's just throw an imaginary number out there that's, in the ballpark. Let's say you have 24 levels above regular top secret. And those are your increasingly higher and higher and higher levels of deep black or deep, super top secret programs. What sort of congressional members and executive members now we know are getting briefings. We know they're getting briefings, but I'd say they're not getting the top level briefings at all. They're getting this lower level, here, let's explain to you what's happening, but, it's not the same briefings that the people at the very, very top levels are getting and the conversation that they are having amongst themselves.
So they're getting essentially a very rudimentary update. When I say rudimentary, I mean compared to what's really going on. They're getting some window dressing, but the technology and what they're actually doing goes so far beyond that.
Correct. And they are essentially being told what the people above them want them to believe.
Right, okay.
So, and for whatever their agendas, maybe is that reason, which could be very complicated and numerous. Now, we're also in a situation where that static relationship of, what layers people are being briefed in at, that's moving a lot. So a lot of the people in the main apparatus have realized that they're being lied to by this chain of command up above them. And they realize that it's not in their best interest to keep trusting these people. So they have been trying to develop their own lines of communication, their own contacts within the military intelligence apparatus and within the extraterrestrial community to get their own answers. So luckily, they haven't just sat there and accepted, the propaganda they've been fed the entire time. They've realized, we're not getting the whole story here. What are we going to do about this? Now, to be fair, when you've got this super secret hidden agenda, you're not really sure how to put your finger on it. And every day you wake up, you're also trying to run the just regular operating apparatus of government with the cluster fudge of, money, special interests, people fighting and bickering and monkey wrenching. That is, you're pretty distracted from actually saying, hey, what are we doing about the aliens and UFOs thing? When it's like, oh, come on, why are we talking about that again? We got an election coming up and the economy's tanking and people are rioting. I mean, there's 19 other conversations to have when you're in political office to keep you distracted and to keep you focused on other things than to say, hey, we really got to sort out this alien extraterrestrial thing because it's really, really, really important. So I think plenty of people understand that it's important, but they've been told for many decades now, hey, somebody else has got the problem. You don't have to worry about it. The best and brightest minds are on top of it. Don't worry. We'll let you know anytime we need to let you know something. And so they've kind of coming from a place of they've just been told that for so long that there is still this kind of conversation that you will have even among certain people within the government or military intelligence apparatus when you say there are rogue agencies who have this technology and they're keeping it from us and we need to have this conversation. Even there are people who will say, well, yeah, they're super secret, but I don't think they're really out to get us. They're doing what they have to do. So people, will reiterate that propaganda because it has been handed down to them over the decades that, oh, we got it. The best and brightest minds got it. But I think enough people in Congress, senators, and the executive branch have been briefed in the last decade. And certainly Dr. Stephen Greer's and the Disclosure Project, there's specific dates that they, handed out big packets and briefing videos to every member of Congress, the Supreme Court, the executive branch, more than once. Stephen Bassett and you had the citizen hearings on disclosure at the press club, which was for 5 days. It was this huge event. They had some former congressmen who came, and they handed that video and briefing documents to, again, members of Congress again and members of the executive again. So to say that they don't know, that they're just busy with other stuff is ridiculous. They've been briefed. They know. They understand what's going on. But because they've been giving two stories, they're like, who do we trust? What do we do? So I think the conversations that are being had are, how do we get at the truth? Who do we trust? What do we need to do about this? What do we need to change our arrangement with these people? If we can't trust them, should we trust these people and go with what they're saying? So when I say, as I often do, allegiances are switching on a daily basis around the world because the top echelon of people who've been supporting the global sort of, New World Order, if you want to call them that, folks have done so with the notion that they will be included in the salvation plan, in the rescue plan, in the secret bunker plan. And it's becoming more and more clear that they are not included in that plan. So it's becoming more in their interest to change their allegiances and go, yeah, you guys are just going to screw us over here. So maybe we should hang out with these people who want everybody to live because otherwise we're going to die. So when I say allegiances are changing, that's what I mean. People are realizing their necks are on the line like everybody else's. And, so they're turning sides. So those conversations that are being had are having on a daily basis. People are switching allegiances on a daily basis. People are reaching out to covert agencies on a daily basis. Other agencies are reaching out to people on a daily basis. So we have this very chaotic soup of what's happening right now this very second. I think it's a good chaotic soup as far as what we're coming from, this lockdown, iron secrecy. The churning of that soup is a good thing. So
I was just going to ask you that, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, because I know people are going to be listening to you and they're going to be saying, okay, this is very interesting, but there's so much deception, there's so much secrecy. So the next question would be, so is it a good thing or a bad thing that they're doing? And when I talk about
well,
they, I mean the secret space program you're talking about.
right. Well, I think it's a neutral good or bad thing that it exists because it just does. I think we understand that the secrecy is a negative thing, that has many negative consequences, and that we have all this amazing technology in the covert space program that if we got access to that, we could fix a lot of our problems. So in that way, I think, yeah, that's a good thing. We should be thrilled that there's a covert space program because we've got decades of technology to solve our green energy problems, to solve our pollution problems, to solve access to clean water and access to healthy food problems. Really, we have every solid piece of technology. We don't have to do 20 years of R&D. We've got the technology if we just could move it from these covert programs into the public sector. So in that way, good thing. It's a very good thing. We have to understand, though, that for decades, that secrecy has gotten worse and worse and worse and more corruptive and making a certain tiny number of people very, very, very wealthy and powerful and kind of screwing over everybody else. So that's the part we have to realize that's bad. That's become a very, very negative thing. And so this churning of what's happening right now, when I say that's a good thing, that means it's a good thing because we're coming from decades of nothing to see here, nothing to see here, to more and more people going, yeah, there is actually something to see there. We know there is something to see there. We know that you're lying to us. We know that there's, tons of evidence now. It's not just a few bits of evidence and a few photographs. It's tons of whistleblowers, hundreds, thousands of whistleblowers, and thousands of photographic evidence and thousands of videos and hundreds of thousands of abductees and just the evidence is becoming overwhelming.
What are they waiting on, Randy? I mean, in other words, is there like a moment in time that they're anticipating? Because I was watching some videos today. The technology with regard to even amateur astronomers can pick up things now that clearly that they would prefer that people not see. I'm talking specifically about the moon. So why won't they come clean? What's the hang up?
Well, again, this is part of the faction problem. That it's not one group of people controlling this whole issue. You've got a bunch of factions of people who say we should do it one way or we should do it another way. And so this, what has been the long-standing on-deck program is what I call, or we refer to a special section, the run it into the ground so that they can build it up program. So that's essentially this whole thing to destroy the economy, destroy the military, destroy the apparatus of state, is drive it into the ground to the point that then you can go, oh, look, isn't it convenient that we already have this apparatus to replace this decrepit, dying thing that we killed, and then we can replace it with this, new world order technocratic civilization thing, which essentially is not a good thing because it essentially there will be no more democracy for the people. There will be no more human rights. There will be no legal human rights for workers and most of the civilian population if that happens. A very tiny number of people will have access to everything and everyone else won't. So those people have an interest and they don't want anybody to know. If they can drag this out, if they can play out the clock, they can win. They can still win if they can play out the clock and everybody just stands around going, oh, what's happening? While they're playing out the clock, they can still win. So part of our push by those of us who are trying to, break that wall of disclosure is to, get sort of use the metaphor, move the ball before the clock time runs out and they sort of go, we won. Everything's, just sort of collapsed into itself. We win because we can stop that process from happening. We can absolutely put on the brakes of global decline and economic destruction and poverty and environmental decline. We can absolutely put the brakes on all of that. And their whole plan would be for naught if people voted. We have a horrible voter turnout in this country, that most of the people who don't vote are poor, working class, middle class people. Wealthy people tend to vote in higher numbers than people who don't make as much money. And so their financial interests and their economic and their social interests are not being represented because they're not voting, because they've been intimidated to think that it doesn't help, that it doesn't matter, and why should they bother? The process is totally corrupt. Why should I vote? So getting people involved in the process and voting is like super important, but also cracking the secrecy where, when we can get to the point where we have a smoking gun, and we're getting so really closer to that. I want to say, some people say, we're never going to have disclosure. They're never going to tell this. I disagree. I think there is an inevitable point when they're going to have to. But exactly when that moment's going to happen is not what are we waiting for or what are they waiting for? It is a battle. It is an absolute fight in the battle for we want people to know versus people are saying, no, we don't want people to know. And as we battle this out, both in the secret sphere and in the public sphere, when one of us wins, they'll either play out the clock and they'll win, or we'll actually get a definitive disclosure moment and we'll win and they'll be forced to do something. And there are a number of conditions under which that could happen. And I would want to say that one of the first that could happen is Vladimir Putin and the Russian apparatus could come out and say so first. They have indicated that they're no longer just waiting for the U.S. to go ahead and lead this if they're not going to lead. And so other countries have not just been kicking the U.S. to lead, but Russia and Putin have pretty much made it clear behind closed doors that if we don't disclose pretty soon, meaning the United States, they will. So that's one way that door could be kicked open. Another plan that could be in the works is the crash of an extraterrestrial vehicle over a major metropolitan area. And when the news trucks all show up and it's on the live news feed right that second because it's happening.
It's on Twitter.
Uh, right. And that might be a staged event. That might not be a natural event. That might be a staged event, but it
Yeah.
might be something that would, on the sort of chessboard of things happening, would force that move across and then would force everyone to go, oh, yeah, I guess we do know something and we're going to have to talk about it now that we have to. So they're going to not as long as they can, and we're going to keep pushing them to have a disclosure moment until there is one. So that, if that answers the question, that's the answer. It's still a fight.
So what I got out of it was that there's this internal battle of war within the power structure,
Right.
right? Those that want to disclose and those that say, no, we're not going to disclose. So that struggle is going on. Now, I did want to ask you, and I promised to get right back to where we left off before I derailed you a little bit here, the memories and the recall. How did you get that all back?
Well, certainly the first thing that I noticed when I came back from my 20-year tour was I did have an emotional memory of things that had occurred. I had a physical, cellular memory of things that had occurred. I had a mental block as far as being able to specifically chronologically account for all of those feelings and sort of cellular traumas and visceral experiences and emotional reactions to things. So I absolutely knew that something had happened. I absolutely knew that it was a real thing because I had been meditating since I was 10 years old, and I knew my body well enough to know when my body was telling me this is real. Something really happened, and my central nervous system and my cellular memory was all telling me that something had actually occurred. And so I just continued doing what I was doing, which was being a regular meditator, someone trying to do my own self-analysis, try and get closer and closer and closer to what I felt was the truth. Or what, I won't even say that. That's not the right way to say that. My mantra when I meditated was, I don't know what happened. I don't know what's going on here, but I just want the truth. The truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, because anything else would lead me astray as a human being. Like I would never be able to find my way as a human being if I'm meditating for clarity and I'm trying to get to the truth and I'm leading myself on a false direction, right? So, I knew from that process that I wanted to get at the truth, the truth, the truth, the truth. And every time I would have these very bizarre memories and sort of have these sort of traumatic experiences that I have to go through this healing process to do of, slowing down the memory, allowing the experience to happen, coming to a place of non-judgment, forgiveness of self, forgiveness of other people and the experience, basic what you have to do when you're trying to heal through anything. And then being able to, and feel a release, from that and knowing that there was a real experience happening, because obviously if you're going through a process to heal and forgive a trauma that's not real, you're not really going to have a real experience from that. You're going to have a catharsis from that. And so having these real cathartic experiences from these processing experiences was also leading me to understand that something very real was happening here, even though I didn't have all the pieces. So it was a lengthy process, but it was a constant, daily, meditative, deep, digging into my memory process to get at the truth and slog away a little bit at a time over decades to get to a place where I could finally understand the larger scope of the experience, have enough of a grounded sort of healing experience with it that I could look it in the face and not panic and not completely freak out and go, oh my God, I can't deal with this.
At what point, Randy, did the dots connect and you felt like, you know what, I think I have the picture now?
I think I was really getting a clear picture after about 10 or 11 years, but I would say it was probably another 5 years before I really could say, okay, I got it now. I was really getting a clear picture, like I said, after about 10, 11 years, but there were enough pieces missing that it was about another 15 years before I could say, I may not have this 100%, but I got this. I understand what's happening. I understand what happened. I understand an arc of this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and I could sort of see the chronology of it, and I could, go into meditative states and come way back and look at the arc of time and go, this happened, then that happened, then that happened, and spell it out for myself every time so that I could really see it. And it was one of those things that I want to be very clear about this too. As a meditator, I would often come away from that experience having this very productive meditative experience, but still in the self-reflective process of going, is that really happening? Is that really what happened?
I was just
And I
going to
would
ask that.
still
Yeah.
and I would still be sort of going back and forth in these moments of denial where even though I'm doing this work and I'm dealing with it and I'm healing and I'm getting closer and I'm getting closer, there were still plenty of moments when I would just go, is this really happening?
Yeah. Am I making this up?
I don't know. Is my brain just going crazy? And the only thing I could really do when I would have those moments is just go, I just have to keep going and find out. There's the only I'll know is if I keep going and keep going and keep going and get to the end. Because the way I understand the way the brain, the mind, and the body works, if you keep digging, eventually you're going to get to the bottom. You're going to get to the truth. You're going to get to the most raw experience. You're going to get to the most centered experience. You're going to get to the most pure experience. And so I figure if this is all some crazy delusional whatever, if I keep going, keep going, keep going, when I get to the bottom, at least I'll find out. So all those moments of skepticism, I knew that I just had, and I would often do this. I would have these skeptical moments, and then as a Gemini, I often talk to myself, and I would go, really? You're having that skeptical moment again? Let's remind ourselves. This happened, and that happened, and this happened, and the scars, and the bruises, and the burns. And then I would go, oh, yeah, right. There's a stack of evidence that I have to be, mindful of that is hard to look at all at once sometimes. And so going through that process I felt like, trying to research a history that was my history, but still was a history I didn't fully understand. And that every time I had a new chapter, I was scratching my head trying to make sure I understood how that chapter fit into the larger context of the story and how it made sense too. Because if I got to a place or a chapter or an event that didn't make sense in the other context, then I would go, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense in this other context. How can that be correct? And sometimes things would be out of order. So I would just have to really get that expansive view and see in the chronology of, no, this experience goes right there. And then I could go, oh, that makes sense. It goes here, before that, after that. And so sometimes it would be like really like a puzzle. Like you've got puzzle laid out in front of you and you got a piece and you're like, where does that one go? Oh, it goes there. It has to go next to that one and in front of that one. So it was a lengthy process. And
You did it on your own.
well, yes. And I also, was constantly seeking help in the sense of trying to communicate with healers, advisors, meditation teachers, my yoga teacher, Qigong teacher, just to try and get advice or ask questions. So I was getting help, in that sense, I was getting guidance, but I was certainly, every time I would really sit down and have the conversation, okay, I know this is going to sound crazy. This is what I think is going on. And I would lay it out for them, and this is to some of my wisest, most amazing friends and teachers, a yoga teacher who's a Kundalini yoga teacher who's been at it for decades, super smart, wise human being, and some other really, really gifted people who I felt, okay, if there's a person who's going to understand sort of this deep psychic, psychological, spiritual experience, it's going to be these people. And those people, when I would say, here's what I got, what do I do with that? They would all pretty much say the same thing, like, wow.
Hmm.
I can't tell you what to do with that. I can't tell you what you should do about that because that's so on you to decide what you're going to do with it. But they were certainly really supportive and, well, are you meditating every day? Yes. Are you making sure that you're doing your grounding exercises? Yes. Are you making sure that you're staying really centered? Yes. Are you got feedback? Are there someone you can get your feedback with and talk about your meditative experiences, talk about your experiences? Not enough. Okay, well, keep meditating, keep staying grounded, keep staying centered, keep trying to find, your centered, grounded place with it, and just keep at it.
Now, did you reach a point where you said, okay, I have to validate this? So did you reach out to somebody, let's say, in the military or in some capacity that you felt like they might know? So let me talk to this person to see if I can get any kind of validation.
There are two things that I did when I got to that point, when I was really at the point like, okay, I think I got this enough. Now I really need to either get, this kind of validation or this kind of confirmation one way or another. And one thing that I did, I had a very dear friend who was a psychiatrist. And so I sat down with my friend, the psychiatrist, I wish was still with us. He passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease, Dr. Timothy Brower. Nice, really amazing guy. And, we sat down, cracked open the DSM-4, and let's look at the symptoms. Let's go through the book. Let's see if you've got another kind of crazy, that we can identify. And then, if that's what you got, it's what you got. But he was very clear and a medical professional who said, you don't have the symptoms of schizophrenia. You don't have the symptoms of bipolar disorder. You don't have any of these other symptoms of any of these other mental illnesses. You have the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So he was certainly a medical professional who was able to say, nope, you're not crazy. You got PTSD. The next thing that I really focused on was what I felt as I began to understand somewhere there's a contract that I signed with my name on it, which means there's a legal apparatus which is supposed to respond to the fact that my contract is not being honored. And even if they're an agency that wants to drag its heels, if I file the paperwork 10 years later, I should get my personnel files. So I had an opportunity to be at a Space Conference convention in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where the Space Command guys, all the industry guys come and have essentially a big convention about space technology. And so all the aerospace tech companies come and all the brass comes to look at the new toys, and they have displays on the new satellites and the technology that they're working on. It was a really fascinating event to be at, actually. Seeing how the out in the open part of the sort of space technology and military intelligence apparatus. I mean, these guys aren't behind closed doors. This is at the Broadmoor Hotel. People got their booths set up talking about this rocket and that capsule and this new technology. And I mean, the covert stuff, I'm sure, was happening in another convention hall across, the hotel where, you had to have the security clearance to get in there and so forth. But everybody was there in the sense of, I don't think I'd ever been to a single location where I saw more stars, on people's shoulder boards in one geographical location. And while I was there, I was looking around, essentially looking for patches, pins, things that might recognize someone that I could ask a question to. Essentially saw an officer who had JAG pins and was in an Air Force division that I thought, maybe I should ask this person a question. And I was a good intuition because I walked up to this gentleman and I said, excuse me, I have a quick question if you don't mind. I have a friend, who was in a covert, unacknowledged special access program. Would just like to get his personnel files, sort out benefits, blah, blah, not trying to be whistleblower, yada, yada. Any advice on what they can do? Because obviously if it was in an unacknowledged special access program, you can't just go ask. And I totally asked the right person because he just said, oh, no problem. I'll tell you exactly what you do. He said, first of all, you have to understand, your friend has to understand that the second that you were discharged from that unit, you lost your security clearance. So your unacknowledged special access program security clearance, you no longer have. So you no longer have permission to ask for your own records because you no longer have the clearance that you used to have in the unacknowledged special access program. So he said, if you personally go to any of these agencies and say, I want to ask my records, I was in this program, they're all going to do the same thing and say, no such thing, that no such program exists, there's nothing we can do to help you. He said, now what you have to do is you have to go to an elected representative, a congressman or a senator from, where you live, and request that they make the request on your behalf because they actually have the clearance to make that request and get the complaint forms and get the paperwork. And he said, so what you want to do is get your congressman's office to request the agency that you feel probably has those files. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it was an NSA program. And he was like, probably. So he said, you have to ask your congressman's office to write them a letter and request an MJ-12 complaint form. He says, there's a complaint form. Most people don't get them. They don't want people to hand them out, but there's a complaint form.
And it's called an MJ-12 complaint?
Called an MJ-12 complaint form.
Because they tell us that MJ-12 didn't really exist.
Right. Well, because again, it's an unacknowledged program, so
Right.
I can't ask for it. I can't ask for it, but my congressman or my senator can ask for it. And then if I can get a complaint form, then I can just fill out in the complaint form, who am I, what my contract, tour duty, yada yada, not receiving benefits, and then that put in the complaint form to then get a bureaucratic review, to then have some, lower level bureaucrat to then review the case and dig up the files and decide whether they have to redact them to let me see them, or whether they'll let me come see them in a closed room. Like, you get to come into a closed room and look at the files, but you don't get to leave with anything. You don't get to write anything down. And then, what information they need from there, or if there's a hearing process to request a hearing. So there's essentially this bureaucratic process that you can go through, but it's just this very slow, secretive process that doesn't move fast.
So you have that request in now?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
No, my attorney, my congressman's office, and that's in the works. We're working on it. That's all I can say about it at the moment, because we're working on it.
What I wanted to do, Randy, because I did derail you there a little bit, but this was very important information to get down. Let's go back to when you were a kid and you're actually having these lucid dreams, or what you believe to be lucid dreams, but it's actually training.
Right.
And then you reach the age, I'm going back to some notes I have here, you get to 17 years old.
Correct. That was when my 20-year tour began in the EDF, MDF. It's a 20-year tour. It was, and the reason people get this easily confused,
Yeah,
is because there was a 17 years, 3 months, 14 days that I was in the MDF in Mars. But it was a 20-year tour. So the remainder of that 20-year tour, I was very fortunate. I got promoted, got to go to flight school, and I spent the rest of that time as a pilot in Project Radiant Guardian on the EDF SS Nautilus as a pilot on a fighter.
okay.
So that encapsulates a 20-year tour, but often people say 17 because that was my tour of duty in the MDF, was 17 years, 3 months, 14
All right,
days.
but from 1970 to 1987, you were not in the service yet.
I was technically still, again, a member of United States Marine Corps Special Section from the time I was born. Okay, so what happens? When I was 17, the United States Marine Corps Special Section now has this parcel of soldiers that they've trained up to that time that, sort of come to their due date at that time. And then that parcel of soldiers is essentially parceled out to a project called Project Mannequin. Project Mannequin is this sort of global covert military project which accumulates all of a percentage of people's super soldiers that they parcel out to this global program to be applied to the larger Earth Defense Force or other military apparatus systems. So from Project Mannequin, you could get parceled to any number of other military intelligence programs that need genetically engineered or specially trained super soldiers. In my particular case, one of the parcels then that Project Mannequin sends to the Earth Defense Force was where I got put into. So that parcel then of super soldiers gets sent to the moon, and there's a contracting, a paperwork process where you're all inducted into the Earth Defense Force at that point. And then the Earth Defense Force decides where do they want to send you. And so this is why this all gets very complicated sometimes. So I was parceled in a section from United States Marine Corps Special Section to Project Mannequin, and then in a section from Project Mannequin to the Earth Defense Force, and then parceled in a section from the Earth Defense Force to the Mars Defense Force, which is a private military contractor that that works for the MCC, the Mars Colony Corporation. So that's why it all gets complicated, because there's many levels of separation that are happening there.
So when you're a kid, then you're having these moments at night, these dreams, which you believe to be dreams, but actually what's happening is you're going off, you're getting your training.
Correct.
And then they would bring you back into your bed, back into sleep. You might have maybe missed, maybe had a time lapse of 15 minutes here, but you spent much longer periods of time in the training. But when they brought you back, they funneled it into a 15-minute piece of time that was, lack of a better term, and correct me if I'm wrong, missing.
Some people like to call that a missing time experience. If you don't remember what happened, that's how it's a missing time.
Yeah.
Or if you sort of think 15 minutes passed by, but really it was like 5 hours, like it's noon, and then you think 15 minutes went by, and all of a sudden it's 5 o'clock. That's a missing time experience. I've had one, certainly had those. But when you go away for a very long time and then come back, that's called a quantum dilation.
Okay.
So specifically, yeah. So essentially cramming a much longer, larger amount of time into a smaller amount of time is not actually what's happening, but it's a way of sort of linear describing it, but it's called quantum dilation.
Okay. Really, there's two parallel processes going on. There's you as Randy as the boy, and then there's Captain K. There's two parallel existences. Am I
Correct.
okay?
Correct.
So in 1987 is when I guess you're ready now as a super soldier.
Right.
So take me from there. What happens at that point? How did you go from being Randy Cramer, the boy at 17 years old, to the super soldier?
Sure. So basically, the night of November the 17th, 1987, which in this case, because it was about 2:30 in the morning, would have been the morning of November the 18th, 1987. As is pretty typical for this type of going away situation. Like I said, localized wormhole opens up, a couple of guys come through. But this time it's not, we're going away for a training exercise. It's, we're going away for much longer. So we went through that wormhole to a underground facility that I believe is in New Mexico, where we boarded an Aurora TRB-3, which is the sort of black triangular craft that
Right.
I believe they're been contracted. The Air Force has been contracting them by Boeing to make them for a number of decades. So they're still the sort of standard fare, atomic powered intrasolar craft. Not the most advanced thing that we have, but when you want to use something to get something into space or shuttle to the moon and you don't want to use rockets, you essentially still use these TRB-3s. There's some other vehicles that they use as well, but they're still a standard workhorse, kind of vehicle. They've operated and last for a long time. They're very sturdy. So we got on board the TRB-3 Aurora, took off towards the moon. I want to say it was an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes maybe to get to the moon. Got to the backside, landed at a place called Platform 1. I don't know much more about it. It's called Platform 1. Disembarked the vehicle to the lunar station, to the Lunar Operations Command. Were escorted to a temporary quarter and then went like a medical screening.
Were you above ground or below ground on the moon?
This was
Randy?
below ground.
Below,
This would have
okay.
been below the surface of the lunar surface, correct?
Okay.
So a medical exam, and then return to the temporary quarters, and then to the administration section to actually sign the EDF, Earth Defense Force contract, and have someone sit there and explain it to you. And I mean, as well as, they want to try and explain a 2-inch contract and, for you to just initial and sign. But he did explain enough, like, okay, this is going to be a 20-year tour. That's how long this is for. But don't worry, they're going to age reverse you. You'll get all that time back. And, they'll give you a nice cushy job when you go back. Don't worry. That's total crap. That's not what the case. But, recruiters, right? I mean, recruiters always lie. You ask anybody who ever got recruited into the military and ask them what their recruiter told them and whether it was the truth. And chances are there were plenty of things that were not the truth. So in typical fashion, we were lied to. And signed the contract, and then because he basically is like couldn't really answer the questions as far as where you're going to go, what you're going to. He's like, I don't know, I can't answer that. And you're not going to know until you leave here and go to your next duty station. Your security clearance won't start until you get to your destination. So he said, all I can tell you is sign, initial, and we'll get this process going. You'll be good to go. We'll take good care of you. It should be fun. Don't worry, it's probably not going to be a big deal. You're probably going to sit in some space station or some, listening post doing nothing. It'll be boring. Before you know it, you'll be done. But no, I got to go to Mars and, fight on the war on Mars. Great. That was fun. So, they tell you it's going to be one thing. It's not exactly going to be that. Sign the contract, go back to the temporary quarters.
When you approach the moon, let me just ask this question. When you were in the craft, the shuttle going to the moon, were you able to view the moon? Is there a way to take a look at what it looked like?
Yeah, there's some window seats, and so yeah, most people don't necessarily want to sit by the window, but I was like, yeah, I want to sit by the window. So yeah, I sat by the window and stared out the whole time. It was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. So what did you notice about the moon? Anything that you noticed that struck you as wow? We weren't told about that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the dark side itself is very interesting. It's laid out really different than the light side, as far as it's really obvious that whoever over some millennia wanted to hide their locations from, the eyes observing from down here on planet side, being on the dark side's the smartest thing. It's like the biggest duck blind in the world, right? I mean, you hide back there in the dark side, you could have a city back there and no one's going to know you've got it because they can't see it because the view's never going to turn to you, to us here on the planet side. So, um, the scale is hard to judge, that sort of black and white gray scale, view of everything, because it's not like lots of colors. It's just a sort of different shades of gray that you're looking at in black and white and gray. Sometimes it's really hard to visualize the scale of things, like how high off am I really above the surface here?
Yeah.
How really big is that thing on the ground? And so, more so than even in an airplane. I mean, an airplane, there's much more texture sort of happening on the ground that can give you a better idea of what the scale is, and objects that you can compare to that you sort of understand familiar size. But seeing objects on the moon, it was much harder.
Yeah.
But I can say this. I mean, there were some significant sized surface buildings and structures. What I would say, towers, round sort of dome shaped buildings, large, long Quonset hut, sort of like half dome, long, almost like a half cylinder in the ground buildings. Some pretty large sizes. A couple of large cubes, just like a giant cube sticking up out of the ground. So some pretty interesting large shapes.
Okay.
Big structures for sure. And as we got closer, and I could definitely see as we were getting closer and closer, and some of what I was looking at was way bigger. And when we flew down into platform 1, we came over a crater that had a bridge, like a land bridge that had been carved out in this crater. It was miles long. It was just miles long that ground vehicles could obviously get from this sort of place out in the middle of this crater. That, again, not all the craters on the dark side are hollow, which is interesting. Some of them have like mesas in the middle. So a crater that has a mesa in the middle is not an impact crater.
Right.
That's dug out somehow, or some other phenomenon that has occurred there. It's obviously not an impact crater. So in this particular case, we came down over a crater that had a large mesa sticking up, out of the center that looked, a couple thousand feet easy off the ground, the floor of the crater, with a land bridge that sort of came out and made it like a giant L shape. That was miles long, miles.
Okay.
And then came to a structure in a building that was, just looked like it had been there a very long time. Not like that we are the original manufacturers of this particular structure, but maybe that we're just using it right now. But it was massive. It was large. An engineering project to build something like that would take more of a manpower, personnel, engineering, raw work, and energy than building like the Hoover Dam or something. I mean, it was bigger than that.
Were you aware if humans were able to function outside of those buildings? Like you mentioned that there were vehicles going over the bridge and stuff like that. Did they have to wear spacesuits? Is there an atmosphere? Is it breathable? Did you become aware of that?
I've never been on the surface of the moon that I can recall, and I cannot say that I could look down definitively and see, someone walking around without a helmet or something.
Okay.
I have heard the rumor that there is this breathable atmosphere on the moon, as crazy as that may sound. I've also heard that it may be a localized phenomenon, meaning there may be the ability to sort of have localized, dome atmosphere that's maintained by some massive electromagnetic shielding or something, so that there are places on the dark side, for instance, that you could breathe, and maybe places on the light side you couldn't. But I don't know necessarily. What I've seen recently is showing me that the technology of whatever they're doing with the moon is something that they didn't stop doing 30 years ago. There's a continuous progression of this cloaking technology that's definitely keeping what's happening even on the light side surface invisible from us. So I get the impression that there's a lot of activity even happening on the light side going on that they don't want us to see, because they're employing this massive cloaking device over the entire surface of the moon. Again, seeing this guy, his amateur telescope, looking at this thing really close, and you can really definitively see, this wave line.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen phenomena like that, and I can't tell you that it looks like anything else other than either a electromagnetic shield to protect from incoming projectiles, or a cloaking shield of some kind to, hide whatever's happening underneath that. I've
Okay.
never seen anything else that looks like that.
Fair enough. So once you were inside the building, there were the beings that you interacted with. Were they all human, or did you see beings that were non-human?
In the areas that I was at Luna Operations Command, I saw only what appeared to be human terrestrial personnel. If there were extraterrestrial personnel, they would have looked, humanoid, and I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference at that time. So
Okay.
I didn't see anything that would have indicated that we were dealing with, you know, direct, overt extraterrestrial involvement. But that would have been on purpose. We would have been contained to an area that, if that wasn't anything they wanted us to see, then we wouldn't have on that particular visit. So I consider, from my memory of that experience, it was a very sanitized visit. We only saw a very limited area. We were there for the minimum amount of time that we needed to be, and then, gone. It was essentially just a processing center. Look, I certainly didn't see the entire Luna Operations Command or the entire lunar base. We were at this one little processing center that I arrived at and departed from. That was, and essentially when we came back, that was sort of the same experience, except I also did, when I came back on the return trip to the moon. Well, we got to have this sort of farewell ceremony, and because I had gotten promoted to an officer at that point, I got to go to the officers' banquet at that point, which is a little nicer. And there were some, guest speakers and so forth. And in that case, we were in a building that was on the surface, and had a large sort of, curved edge. I think we were in some kind of a dome on the edge of it, because there was this massive glass wall that looked out onto the surface, and that you could also see the Earth, rising up like the moon out in the sky. It was pretty surreal.
Interesting. Interesting. So then, you got to sign your paperwork. Now, what would happen if you decided that I don't want to do this? Would they put you back on the shuttle and send you back to Earth?
Somehow, I don't think that would have been the case. Recruiters are like salesmen. They're taught to always be closing, get to yes.
Yeah.
So I think that they know their job well enough to get you to sign. And if there's really a problem, then they go, oh, I gotta. Then they, usually, don't make me call my supervisor. It's usually enough to make everybody go, okay, okay, okay. It's just my job. Don't take it out on me. So I think they're pretty good at just getting people to sign on the dotted line. What else are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what else are you going to do at that point? I got to admit, you feel pretty powerless, in the sense of, what am I going to do? Walk home?
Yeah, exactly.
What am I going to do? Say no? I mean,
Go on to the
at
next
this
shuttle
point,
back
it's
to
not
Earth.
really like you have a choice. Yeah.
So then, they have you sign the paperwork, and how long were you there before they decided to deploy you?
Not very long. I mean, it was less than a day. I mean, it was less than 24 hours
Okay.
from the time that we arrived, the medical examination, signing the paperwork, and then on the shuttle and out of there. They had a pretty efficient system for that.
Okay. So then what happened? They had sent you over to Mars?
Correct. We boarded this much larger transport vehicle that took us up out of the sort of subterranean hangar that was parked in the moon on the Lunar Operations Command. Came up around the moon, came around closer to Earth, so we could take this final look at Earth, and everyone could sort of say goodbye and wave and think about their families and so forth. And it was a truly awesome experience to see the planet in sort of this large window space where you're seeing the whole thing. You're seeing it all as one cohesive thing without lines defining borders, and the color on the maps, it's all one color, it's the planet. And you definitely get a sense at that point that no matter what you've been taught your entire life, one planet, it's just one, and
Right.
the countries really just don't matter as much when you're looking it up there. And the oceans matter a lot more. You start to see, from looking up at that perspective, how much the oceans matter because of how much of space they take up.
Right.
And seeing the ice caps and how big they are, and as they melt, how important those are. So it really is quite literally a big picture view, and lets you see the big picture. And when you can see the big picture, you changes your viewpoint. You don't just see yourself as an American or as a this kind of person or that kind of person. You really see yourself as an earthling and a person that's part of that whole larger network. And yeah, I mean, it was just an awe-inspiring, emotional experience. It's hard to describe. It was timeless. Like I don't know if we were sitting there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It seemed like it stretched out for a long time, but obviously we weren't there for hours. It was a finite period of time, but it was definitely a timeless moment of staring at the planet like that. It was pretty impactful.
How large was the craft, Randy, that you were on at this point?
So I've said this numerous times. I've tried to give the scale of it, and I had to disclaim for myself that as we walked into this hangar, the size of the hangar, the size of the vehicle, it's hard to register the scale. So it was at least 4, 5, 6 stories tall, 7. I mean,
Wow.
It was big. It was at least 6, 7, 800 feet wide. It sort of had a rounded front, teardrop to the back. It had kind of wings. It didn't fly. That tapered. It was a chrome, sort of reflective, mirrored surface, and sort of up, maybe 2/3 up the front was this cockpit window, where you could sort of see a couple guys, moving around up there. Again, seemed like it was far up. They were way high up there, and it was really, again, hard to gauge that scale, but it was large. I'd say it had multiple floors, so I know from the floor we were on and the section we were on, the thing must have been able to hold 2,500, 3,500, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 personnel.
So 2 football fields long and 5 to 6 stories high?
Yeah,
Wow.
massive.
Wow. That is massive.
Amazing feat of engineering. I mean, just if you know anything about how you got to put things together and build things and engineer something that size, it is just an amazing feat of engineering to build something like that. Basically, you're building a flying building because that's what it is. It's essentially big enough to be a building, and you're making it so it can frickin' fly. That's an amazing feat of engineering.
I'm going to think about this the next time I have to take a 747 someplace.
Right.
So then, they give you one last glimpse of Mother Earth, and then what happens?
Then we essentially flow through a larger wormhole that took us right to the orbit of Mars, and within less than 15 minutes, the pilot is telling us, welcome to your destination. We're now orbiting Mars. We'll begin our descent momentarily, and then we descended straight down to Ares Primus, which is the headquarters of the Mars Colony Corporation, which is sort of in the middle north equatorial region, and in a fairly sizable crater, I want to say, or what appeared to be a sort of a valley. I mean, at least walls rising up out of the side. So we came down and touched down on the ground onto a tarmac, and the gangplank opened up, and everyone started filing off. And there was a moment where I'm like, oh, hey, wait a minute, no spacesuits, Mars, guys. But, they're rushing everybody up, going, go, 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 So I kind of figured, I guess it's okay. And, just kind of filing off with everybody else. And then the second I hit the ground, sun, I got to squint my eye because, the sunlight's hitting me in the face, and I can feel warm sun on my face, and I can feel a cool breeze hit my face, and I can take a breath of air and smell this really dry air, and chilly air, and go, oh, I guess we can breathe here. I guess it's okay. And at that point, there's no debate at that point about whether there's a breathable atmosphere on Mars, but I'm telling you, the second you walk out of the ship and you step on the ground and you go, guess we're good. I mean, conversation over, debate over. So, you just accept at that point, oh, breathable atmosphere. Okay.
Did they make sure you put orange, red lenses on so that you could see it the way NASA shows us? So how did it look to you?
That moment there was okay, so the sand, sort of as I was looking at it, was this very yellowy, orangey color of sand. Now there is a lot of iron oxide, so there's kind of this reddish, orangish dust all over the place. Yeah. But I would say that the sand was very yellow right there in that particular place. The rock outcroppings did have sort of this, Colorado red rock kind of look to them. So there was a lot of red, but the sky, very blue.
Hmm.
I was looking at blue sky. A, I'd call it a bit paler, more pale of a blue than maybe the way if I look up at the sky outside my house in the middle of the day, it's a bit of a darker blue color than the Martian sky.
Yeah.
So, but it was blue. It was a blue sky.
Yeah, it's interesting. The pictures that are coming back now, even the NASA JPL from the rover, those pictures now, what I'm seeing, Randy, is over time, incrementally, they're adjusting the color so that we're not getting that red orange tint anymore. We're starting to get a more natural view of what Mars looks like. In fact, there's a couple of people on the web. This guy Keith Laney does a great job of doing the color corrections, and it's very clear with Keith's work that the sky is blue.
Right, and I know I've watched some people do these color corrections, and what's making it so obvious is that with the right software, you basically click one light filter and it just goes back to normal. So it's not
Yeah.
even like you have to do this really complicated, let's fix the light filter thing. You just have to turn off the same thing that they're using to turn on, and then you just get the natural image and you just get that corrected image. So it's
Mm.
not even this super rocket science process to just, get that orangish and red tint out of there.
It's very interesting. So then you're deboarding the ship, and then where do they take you from there?
So at that point, we're rushed along, sort of a series of lines to these smaller shuttles and put onto a shuttle that's, a bit smaller than a school bus, and then taken across the Martian surface for, it was a couple hours, 2.5 hours, maybe a 3-hour trip from Ares Primus to get to Forward Station Zebra, which was going to be my new home for the next 17 years. And then we which is essentially inside a mountain. And so we came into the giant hangar doors, into the hangar/motor pool, and parked and disembarked into Forward Station Zebra, and then we're led down into the barracks. And there's a guy with a clipboard calling off names and telling us which squad we're now a part of, and pointing us into the direction as we go along. And that was the beginning of my first day. I arrived and then got to meet my squad and start learning training on the body armor and the rifle and all the training equipment, and learning to walk and stand all over again in Martian gravity.
I was just going to ask you about the gravity. What was that like?
Well, okay, so to make two very important distinctions, there are places where we had gravity plating. So, and I can't tell you, don't ask me how it works. I'm not a scientist. I can't tell you how that gravity plating works, except that we had the ability to have locations where we were operating that when you stepped on the ground, you felt like you were on Earth again. You just felt like the gravity was pulling on you normally, which is a pretty smart thing if you don't want your people to have atrophy so that they can't come back, which is basically what would happen if you grew up and lived on Mars and your muscles atrophied to that gravity. You wouldn't be able to come back. So setting up the gravity plating was important for having, if you wanted to be able to have people that could come back, and you wanted to have two-way transportation, you couldn't have people in this lower gravity atrophying their muscles to 0.79 or whatever it is, and then come back to 1.0 G and not be able to function. So the gravity plating is pretty essential.
Okay.
It also has this side effect of making us the stronger species on a lower gravity planet. So we're from the heavy gravity planet when we're on Mars. So it's not exactly John Carter height, if you saw John Carter, but you definitely have more height, more jump that you can get there than you can here. And when you're a toddler and you're learning to walk, one of the things that you're learning how to do is coordinate the weight and balance of your upper body and your lower body. So, there's a lot of whoa, tipping forward, whoa, tipping back as you're learning to make that adjustment and make your legs move at the right speed. It turns out that is a specific relationship to the gravitational coefficient of the planet you're born on. So the second you go to somewhere where there's a different gravity, you're learning how to walk all over again. So when you watch the outtakes of the guys on the moon, they're falling down all over the place. They're having a hard time, trying to stay up, because you have the same problem on the moon or on Mars or anywhere else you go. The gravity is just enough different that your upper body, lower body has to figure out, how to move again. and it's really easy to just get your feet moving faster, your upper body moving faster, and fall on your face. So when you're out on the Martian surface, and because we had a powered exosuit, environment suit, that made us even stronger and could jump even farther. So learning how to maneuver in the Martian gravity in a powered exosuit was like learning to walk all over again. Absolutely, learning to walk all over again.
Okay. So then what was your mission when you got there? Because it wasn't going to be what the recruiter told you, right?
Absolutely not, right? We were informed in our first intelligence briefings that the situation on the ground was we had two neighboring indigenous species, one reptile, one insect or mantid, as we call them now, and that we had a regular hostile engagement process with both of them and sort of were maintaining a territorial line and a neutral zone between us and the colonies. And essentially, our job would be to respond to any aggressive acts on their part, as well as to, in some cases, initiate aggressive acts where it was deemed militarily appropriate or necessary, which, means the guys on top, whenever we want to attack or blow something up, we can. There's really not a set of rules as far as when you really ethically or morally can attack something when you're testing your military equipment and you're developing military equipment. And the only way you get to test it and develop it is if you use it. So any excuse to use and develop the equipment is an excuse to develop and use the equipment. So we engage with them out in the open on the desert surface on the Martian plateau. We engage with them in their bases. We engage with them at our bases. And
they were indigenous.
Correct. And my understanding is that there is also a native humanoid species. We did not encounter them. They're not in the northern polar region where we were at, or we did not experience them there. I'm also told that there's another native, or, when I say native, they've been there long enough to be counted native now, of an extraterrestrial species that's similar to the Greys, or sort of little big heads. So my understanding is there could be a minimum of 3 or 4 native terrestrial species. There could be even a couple more that we don't all get briefed on. So the notion that Mars is this empty place is just it's the opposite. It's a very full place, and there's a dynamic community of people living there with different interests and working together and fighting one another, and it's a very dynamic place. You think about the geopolitics of planet Earth and how complicated that is. Just as complicated on Mars as far as all the number of pieces that are on that chessboard are all interacting in some geopolitical way, which is just not smooth and cohesive. There's a certain chaos and process to it all that's, not the same that it was 10 years ago, is not going to be the same that it's going to be 10 years from now. So when we talk about Mars, I can tell you what happened when I was there, but it's probably not the same thing that's going on now. And what's going to happen over the next 10 years won't be the same either. So it's not a static process. It's a dynamic, ever-changing process that we should expect to keep hearing different information and different stories as the process evolves, and not just keep hearing like the same story all the time, because it's a changing place and a changing environment.
Did you ever come to know, Randy, how long the Earth-based presence was there, the bases and so on?
My understanding is like the first probe that we touched down on the Martian surface was in like May 22nd, 1963, and that we were establishing our first military bases on Mars in the early 1970s, 1970, 71, and that the Martian colonies, the first colonies, were established at about 1974, 1975.
Okay. And so
that's the timeline that I've been told that I've been briefed on.
So, and maybe you don't know this, but the Earth-based presence when it got there, what was the reception like? Was it hostile, or were they leery, or okay, come, but you better behave yourself, or nobody cared?
I couldn't answer that specifically because I wasn't there. From reports that I've heard of people who were in some of the early exploratory missions there, like Andrew Passaggio, who is a very good friend of mine, and we've had wonderful conversations about this. I think that he explains fairly clearly that there was a certain amount of distance or cushion that they seemed to have from other things or other people, but at the same time, there was certain natural wildlife and other, extraterrestrial or native life, which they were informed, not to engage or to stay away from, or to, if you see this, report back or get away. This could be dangerous. So they were certainly in a active hostile environment, or an environment that could turn hostile at any minute. So it was definitely, I wouldn't say that we were greeted, so much as with a certain amount of suspicion and a certain amount of hostility.
Because
And
I would be suspicious if we showed up.
certainly, yeah, yeah. But I think also because the environment and geopolitics of Mars is not like, there isn't a Mars government. You know what
Hmm.
I'm saying? I mean,
Right.
there are communities and governing states and communities all over the planet that are localized. So the reptiles have localized communities, localized governorships, localized underground cities. The mantids have localized hives, localized communities that, while they can have, be communicating in sort of the same allegiance to one another, they're still managed and run by the individual queens of the hive, and so they're not necessarily, answering to each other in the same exact way,
Okay.
or members exact necessarily of the same hive mind at that point, because the hive mind really kind of comes down from the queen, and the queen sort of interact in a way that's psionic and interspecies, but isn't the same way as the same hive mind that they do when sort of a queen operates a hive. I don't know if that's a little complicated. I don't know if that explains that properly,
No,
but
I think what I'm hearing you saying is there is no global governance, that they have
right,
their patches, their territory, and this is mine. You can be here, but don't be stepping in here unless we allow you in.
right.
Right.
And
Okay.
as much too as, like, any conquistador, you land on a spot and you say, "This is our spot," and as long as you can defend that spot, that's your spot.
That's the
So
spot. Okay.
yeah,
Now, did you notice any kind of vegetation and stuff like that?
certainly. Oh yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like small shrubs, small bushes, small vegetation that's around. Uh, Ground birds, ground diggers, ground reptiles, small critters. Absolutely. There was a number of. I mean, like a desert environment. A lot of it. I don't know that I ever encountered a grove of trees. I mean, I encountered streams, tributaries, ponds, small lakes. Bodies of water. Nothing that I would call, like an ocean or the Great Lakes or something massive. It was all, small enough to be on a smaller sort of desert type scale, mountainous scale. But yeah, there's life all over the place there. All over.
Okay. And your view of the small shrubs and the water and the small animals, that's coming from the perspective of where you were stationed, right? Because did you have access to the whole planet?
No, we definitely forward station Zebra was one of, if not the northernmost, farther extended operating station from the colonies, and we had this large grid map, and so divided into sectors, and every forward operating station had a number of sectors, that kind of made this not exactly a perfectly outlined, kind of almost like a gerrymandered, kind of territory that was like, these are the sectors you're responsible for, these are the sectors you're responsible for. So anything happening within that sector, the command staff and the commanding officer, has this sort of direct responsibility for. We would certainly occasionally be sent to another section to help, defend or action in someone else's sort of responsibility. Other divisions would come to us and engage with us in conflicts with other people when we needed the backup. So, you have sectors that define your area, but there's some, maneuverability around that depending on military and tactical need. But basically, yeah, I would say that 99% of my 17 years on Mars was in this, sort of plot of sectors that Forward Station Zebra was responsible for, and not much outside of that.
Now, how much hostility was there, or was it essentially harmonious and every once in a while there would be skirmishes and battles? How did that work out?
At least I'd say they had a war clock, that they had developed over time, that basically said we had a consistent clock that said there was going to be an attack every 5 to 9 days. So, when we would come back from a battle, you would reset the war clock, and we would say, okay, we now have between 5 days to prepare for the next conflict. And then once we hit 5 days, we know that if it hasn't happened by then, that we've got between 5 and 9. We're prepared. Oh, it's the 6th day, it's the 7th day. It's going to be today. It's the 8th day. Oh, day's 9. It's going to be today. And knowing that you're going to have that sort of happen between these very sort of predictable times based on this kind of tactical war clock that they developed based on the sort of conflict and the rate of conflict that it happens.
So it was perpetual then?
About once a week, a good battle once a week.
What were the battles over?
Like I said, we either would engage out on the plateau or engage at someone's base. So it depends on the situation. Do we see them coming from a long distance away, so that we sort of have time to meet them out on the plateau before they come to us? Or is this a situation where, oh, surprise, they're just coming over the other mountainside. We don't have time to do anything other but prepare for an assault and get ready for them to assault the base. So it tactically would depend on that situation. Or if we were being told, patrol this area, or we're sending the whole division out to this sector and maybe you'll run into someone, or we're going to invade this hive or this base or this station, and then come back and see what we can extract, see what we can get, intelligence, material, artifacts, so forth, and then get back. So command makes the decisions. We're soldiers, and depending on what the day is, we get told, oh, they're coming, we have to respond, or they're here, we have to respond, or go patrol, every day is patrol day, or we're going to go get them. So, not too many possibilities,
So why would they attack though, Randy? What is it that motivated them to attack, or for that matter, for you guys to attack?
Well, so sometimes I know this is hard for people to understand because people presume that certain tactics or strategies would apply here. Because we have certain tactics or strategies that we live or apply here on Earth, and somehow that would be the same, or we should expect it to be the same. It's not necessarily the case. The best thing I can do to describe this is, imagine you've got a circle, and in that circle you've got 3 people in sort of triangular position in that circle. And these are people who are in conflict with one another. And that in order to feel like one person doesn't have an unfair advantage over anyone else, the simplest, easiest tactic is every once in a while for someone to run across the circle, kick someone really hard in the shin, and then run back. So while that person is down nursing their shin, they're not going to attack anybody. And then maybe the next person is going to run over and then kick you in the shin. And then while you're nursing your shin, then you get back up and kick the enemy in the shin. So essentially you have this process where instead, there's not a battle for global domination. There's not a battle for, it's all or nothing. That was really considered by the native reptiles and the native mantids a waste of resources. Like how much resources they would have to expend to exterminate the humans was just silly. This is a massive amount of resources that they're not willing to expend. Same for us. I mean, if we wanted to eradicate the reptiles or the mantids, we would have to spend an amazing amount of resources to get that done. So it made more sense to defend the territory you have, keep kicking people in the shin around the circle so that no one gets too uppity and burns, your front line down and can run across your DMZ and raid the colonies. That essentially, as long as you're engaging in this sort of regular, what I used to sort of call polite warfare, it maintains its own status quo, which is no one's going to is going to rule over everyone else. No one's going to eliminate or eradicate everyone else, and everyone gets to maintain their territory and what the stake that they've laid claim to. So the main strategy was keep everybody a little off guard, a little, off center by just kind of regular, gotcha, gotcha, and then run back and defend your space, and then someone's going to, gotcha, and then you're just going to keep doing that because that's the most economical and energy practical thing to do to maintain your resources and your territory and what you want.
That's very interesting because it sounds like what's going on there is to make sure that no one gets overly comfortable, too strong. So by this tactic, it kind of keeps everybody on their toes, and there's an equilibrium. There's a balance that's set, right? Even though there's violence involved, nobody is extending themselves beyond where their territory, their patch is, which is
Right.
interesting. And the reason why a lot of people would struggle with that is because it is not like that on Earth, right?
Right.
So here we have the military just plowing over everybody. And maybe that wouldn't happen if other countries or other geographies on Earth had a similar level of strength, if you will, right? And then
Right.
they could do the shin kicking. You stay there, we stay here. Everybody behaves themselves, and we're okay. So that's interesting. So now let me ask you this then: what is the mission, the overall mission that you were engaged in? In other words, what is the purpose of the Mars Colony Corporation?
Well, I can't exactly answer that question for you because as a member of the MDF, which is the Mars Defense Force, which is contracted by the MCC, by the Mars Colony Corporation to defend the colonies, I can tell you that as a member of the MDF, our mission was very specific and clear to us, which is to protect and defend the colonies for the Mars Colony Corporation, and any and all material resources that they're sort of, legally responsible for. So now, not having been to the colonies myself, I can't tell you exactly what's going on there. I do know.
What are the
Uh,
colonies?
I'm sorry.
What are the colonies?
Oh, I don't know the names of them, but allegedly there's five of them. There are five colonies, and Ares Primus, I believe, is one of them, and it's the headquarters of the MCC as well. And the other colonies are spread out from each other. I don't know exactly where they are. I don't know exactly know what their names are. I've been told that they're, like nice sort of classic constellation Greek names like Cassiopeia and Andromeda and, stuff like that, but I'm not really sure. We were often just, anytime they were ever referred to us, they were often just referred by a number, a numerical value, colony 1, colony 2, colony 3.
Okay.
Or by a sector value or a sector number or something like that. So it was really not in our compartmentalization to know much what was going on in the colony. I will say this. Since I've come forward and spoken, given my testimony, I have had other people who I have served with and who have served on Mars who have contacted me. And we have been able to have independent corroboration of our experiences, of our knowledge of one another, knowing each other by nicknames, and well as knowing that those people are talking to other people who are talking about their experience in the Mars program. So while I am this one person who is talking about this on a regular basis and coming forward and leading the charge, as it were, there are a lot of other personnel who have served on Mars who are just not ready to come out and talk publicly like I have. And I know at least a half a dozen of them, and the half a dozen that I know, each know a dozen more. So we're talking about a lot of people who, when they really feel like they're confident about their process and about their ability to speak up without retaliation or without oppression in a way that they feel is okay for them. We're talking about a lot of people. And I've certainly had a lot of corroboration of things and events and technologies and places. Based on that, I can tell you, pretty sure there's a mining operation because going to need to pay for all that some way, and minerals and mining is a way to pay for that. But the colonies certainly have their own agricultural base. They have their own ability to grow crops. I think most of this is not an above ground thing. They either have to have these domes or these underground sort of facilities for this. Just because the wind on the surface of Mars, if you get a storm, can be high enough that, if you were just growing corn, it could just rip up, your
Right.
crops and kiss your corn goodbye. But there's also some ranching that's going on, some pig farming. I don't know about beef or cattle, but they're definitely doing some chicken and pig farming as well. So there's poultry and some ranching. So they are trying to sustain the colonies, with their own food sources. They're trying to sustain it economically with at least a mining program. What else exactly? Other kinds of programs, I'm not sure. I'm obviously a military contractor that's working on defense technology. So, I can tell you that over a 17-year period, we updated our technology on a pretty semi-regular basis, and we're using more and more updated equipment. We weren't using the same exact battle suit, when I left as when we got there. We weren't using the same rifle, and the helmet had changed, and, all this other equipment had changed. And so, we definitely were in an evolution of defense technology and a progression of defense technology that was being developed by somebody, built by somebody, sold by somebody, purchased by somebody. So there is this whole other economy, this defense contracting economy, agricultural economy, ranching economy, mining economy that is taking place in the larger solar system, which we're still being excluded from. So the planetary global economy, for the most part, is still being excluded from this solar economy, which I can't tell you what the numbers are, but if I'm to understand the value of that intersolar intergalactic economy, the covert military space program, covert military Mars colony corporation, so forth, they're making trillions and trillions and trillions of equivalent dollars per year in all of that material. So the notion that somehow down here on Earth we're poor and we don't have enough to help feed everybody and we don't have enough to take care of everybody, oh, that's garbage. You know, the planetary economy itself would be enough if we evened it out. But when you include the intrasolar intergalactic economy, it's ridiculous. We could all be living like princes if that wealth was, you know, evenly distributed around the planet, which I'm not saying to evenly distribute all of the wealth. I'm saying that to make it so much of it is concentrated in this very, very tiny part.
Right, right.
To say the rest of us, there's scarcity and we don't have enough for you. It's just lies on top of damn lies.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. Now, Randy, I want to be respectful of your time also as we go along here, but how did you wrap up your tour of duty? What happened that as you came to a close?
My tour of duty on Mars pretty much ended with the end of our division and our sister division and two other divisions that participated in a military exercise. So our division 098, Special Tactical Operations Division 098, Forward Station 0, about 216 squads of 16 personnel, so like 256 soldiers in that division. We had a sister division 097, another 256 soldiers, plus officers and, you know, other personnel. So the division itself is much larger than 256, but the soldier base for each division of the Special Tactical Operations Division is 256 people. So us, our sister division, the two other supporting divisions, so it was just over 1,000 men and women, soldier personnel on the ground that engaged in this battle, which went very badly for us. You'll forgive me if I brush over some of it. I don't really like talking about it. It gets me choked up and emotional, and I don't like, you know, remembering it too clearly because it was an ugly, ugly, ugly massacre where there were just over 1,000 of us that walked into that cave, and less than 35 of us came out of that cave. And so,
Wow.
You know, I feel very fortunate in ways that I cannot even describe how fortunate I feel to be alive, knowing, you know, just that particular day, what the odds were that I was not going to be alive at the end of that day, given what the odds were that not everybody else was going to be alive at the end of that day. And that I still ended up being alive at the end of that day is nothing less than miraculous to me.
What were you going into the cave for?
We were informed that it was, we were after an artifact. And when I say artifact, that just means anything that belongs to the native reptoids or insectoids. That could be a piece of technology, it could be a piece of pottery, it could be a statue, it could be a clay tablet or a metal, you know, cylinder that has inscription on it or something. It could be a personable material. It could be persons. It could be a weapon technology or anything. So when some say an artifact, that's a list of things that an artifact could be. So
Okay.
we were given a location. We were told where we needed to go. We were told where the entrance of this particular cavern was, that this was a known sacred location for these reptiles, and they kept this particular artifact in this location, and that it was somehow going to be vulnerable for us to go get it. But when we got there, there was no sign of anything. So very quickly, we attempted to communicate back with HQ, letting them know that, you know, the artifact in question was not there. When we immediately encountered, you know, radio jamming, we were not able to communicate, and we realized that something at that point was about to go very, 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 very badly wrong. All I can say is, as a soldier, when you're told to go somewhere and there's something going to be there, and you get there and it's not, and then you can't radio HQ, that sinking feeling in the bottom of your stomach that you know you just walked into a trap and you just
Right.
might, I mean, that's just a bad feeling. And so that was the feeling. That instant was like, oh, this is not going to be good. And this large oblong cavern, and it wasn't, when I say cave or cavern, because it was down into the rock, but the carving out of this cavern was more like a temple or a cathedral. I mean, it wasn't just like a raw limestone primitive cave or something with, you know, primitive paintings on it or something. This was a real feat of art and architecture. but it was down, down, down deep underground in a very large cavern. So the cavern itself is very kind of oblong shaped, football shaped maybe. And as we're in the middle, all the way around us in sort of the circular, almost like clock positions, these, doorways start opening up and a just flood of warriors, reptile warriors start pouring out of all of these doorways. We're surrounded within seconds, 20 to 1, 30 to 1, outnumbered, by numbers in which it did not look good. And they essentially just started moving around in a counterclockwise direction. And they have very large, pointy, stabby, slashy things. And I often refer to this event as the blender, because that's just what it was. It was just blades going around in a circle. And our group of personnel just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as the blender was put on puree. And we finally were able to reestablish communication with HQ, and they were letting us know that there was a solution forthcoming, but, they were working on it. And we let them know that they'd better hurry, or we were going to all be dead. That was not going to be okay where I was standing. But within, another minute of that, we were essentially they were jamming the localized wormhole technology that would have been able to sort of, get out. So a large wormhole that they used to sort of transport ships or vehicles through sort of appeared right over the top of us and pulled us right through it. And, a few people were caught on the event horizon of that, and so they were like essentially limbs cut off or cut in half. And so we ended up on a medical receiving platform, with a bunch of people lying on the ground, bleeding, coming apart, a few people standing, shocked, trying to look around and try and figure out what's happening. And all I could do was look down at, my comrades who were bleeding out to death and calling for medics. And kind of had a nervous breakdown. I kind of wasn't cool with all of this and really just kind of lost it and started swinging my arms pretty wildly. And, knocked a couple orderlies, in the head. And the next thing I know, like I'm just being tackled by medical technicians and shot, with tranquilizers so that, I just kind of faded into black from that experience and woke up in a chemical fog.
Were you injured in the attack?
No. I was I was kind of close to the center when the whole thing happened. And so I really didn't know what else to do, for the very few minutes that really this whole thing was taking place, other than to try and, be in the middle, try and establish radio contact, try and issue some command orders and try and tactically, do something on the ground and not just lay down and go, oh, we're dead. Try and defend ourselves, try and fight back, try and do something. But it was just all very hopeless and fruitless. It wasn't, we were not going to win that fight. We were horribly, horribly outnumbered. So, we tried, I did what I could, during that period of time. And then, when we finally got out, we got out and I was just shocked and stunned and felt the luckiest person in the world to have survived that entire event. Anyway, I woke up, in a daze on a gurney, and my commanding officer, who is, Colonel Jack Jameson, said to me, he said, well, you're not going back to the division. That's not going to happen. You're done there. How would you like to go to flight school? How would you like to fly? And anybody who knows me knows that it was my dream to be a pilot from the time that I was 5 years old. So I was like, hell yeah. So I essentially was sent to a sort of a medical facility, which, probably like a psychiatric ward of a hospital for about a week, just to make sure that I was not completely, mentally unhinged. He said, no, we're just going to, give you some medical time, make sure you're checked out, make sure, after everything you've been through, your organs are all functioning. And so I had like a 7-day, medical leave, call it that. And then, when they checked me out after 7 days, I went off to flight school and went to flight school and learned how to fly advanced flying craft, and then became a pilot and was given an officer's commission, and then spent the rest of my tour of duty, just, over 2.5, 2 3/4 years-ish, as a pilot on the EDF-SS Nautilus, which stands for Earth Defense Force Starship Nautilus. It technically has intergalactic traveling capabilities, but we never left the solar system. It was essentially just something we drove around the solar system and patrolled with. And then, like an aircraft carrier, the pilots in the air wings, would get on their fighter crafts and their bombers and fly out to do patrols and missions and come back to the larger ship and just regular old kind of stuff that you would do if you were a pilot on an aircraft carrier, except it's in space.
So you patrolled the solar system. How far out did you go?
I mean, almost to the Oort cloud. I mean, our perimeter was essentially, the wide perimeter of the solar system, but basically anything past that was not in our jurisdiction. So, most often what you would get is we would, or at least the command officers would explain it this way, which is, now we're doing an intrasolar tour right now, which means, we're sort of touring the intrasolar planets, doing this sort of intrasolar patrol. Or, no, we're doing an outer solar patrol right now. We're sort of in the outer planets. Sometimes, the captain or one of the commanders would call it, we're doing a boondocks, run, like we're way out on the edge, out where Pluto is, but when Pluto's on the other side of the solar system. So, I mean, there's just nothing out there at that particular corner at that particular time. So all over the solar system.
So what were you patrolling for?
We were protecting just the space, period. We certainly had a number of bases, a number of space stations, all of these larger starships that are flying around. I don't know how many are in the fleet. I couldn't tell you that. But we certainly have more than a few. Mostly patrols are patrolling for things that are not supposed to be there. And so if you run into something that's not supposed to be there, one of two things is going to happen. That thing is either going to run away from you at that point, or it's going to try and fight you. And I'd say 19 times out of 20, things don't want to fight you. They would rather run away and leave. It's just not tactically or efficient for them to engage in a military act at that point. So 19 times out of 20, you run into something that's not supposed to be there, and it runs away from you, and then you chase it until it gets to a perimeter or a point where you've said, yeah, and stay out, and then, return back to your patrol location or return to base at that point, file a report, or what have you. So essentially you either chase it off, or if it, takes a shot at you, then you call for backup and, return fire, take a formation, take an attack formation, or something. And if there's multiple of us, which, there's always a patrol of, anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen vehicles of us at any given time, and we run into 1, 2, or 3 vehicles that don't belong there, we're going to do fine. We outnumber them. We're going to do fine. We have fast vehicles with plasma cannons on them, essentially a lightning gun that can basically project over like 5 million joules, okay, like out of the end of this plasma cannon, this lightning gun that penetrates the body armor and the fuselage of these vehicles. So we essentially aren't trying to hit them with hard particles to, knock through an outer fuselage. You're hitting it with a penetrating energy weapon that goes right through the fuselage, into the energy components, into the power center, and hits it with about 5 million joules, overpowering, short-circuiting everything, and in some cases, blowing up the entire vehicle or causing a fatal cascade of some kind, and the whole thing blows up. But, minimum, usually you get a good shot on someone, and you're going to cripple them, and they're not going to go anywhere, and they're going to float there in space. And then someone else will come and pick them up. If you disable a vehicle, there is another squad that comes to pick that vehicle up and take charge of the vehicle, the personnel, pilots, living or dead or whatever. So a recovery, there's even, recovery teams out there, part of Radiant Guardian, whose job it is to recover crashed or destroyed vehicles and pilots and so forth. So it just wasn't our job. Our job was to chase them away or shoot them down. But if we did, someone else could come up and clean it up.
Now, were there any other stopovers aside from Mars where that you knew of, where there were bases or points where you could, I don't know, park your ship?
I've certainly have been to the base on Titan. I know there are a few other space stations floating around the solar system that occasionally, we would stop at and exchange personnel or exchange supplies. Most of the time, though, you're within kind of a reasonable distance from, the starship that you're assigned to. And, a patrol is a certain amount of time and distance to go away and then come back. So not often that you get out in a squadron and you're away, away, way, 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 way for a really, really, really long time, far, far away where you need to worry about like parking somewhere and kind of, waiting something out or that you're waiting for anything, or maybe you even need to take a rest period. The cockpits of these vehicles, these are large vehicles. I want to point out that even though they're not tiny, tiny like fighter crafts, they're still fighter crafts, but they're big because you're operating in space. So aerodynamics, wind resistance is not as much of a factor of creating like a super, super tiny vehicle. But, there's certainly aerodynamics still. They can fly in atmospheres. But every cockpit, not unlike like a semi tractor trailer, like a long haul trucker, you've got a little cot in the back and a little restroom in the back. I mean, you can't, if you got to go, you got to go. You got to go in the back, and if you need a rest period, you got to go in the back. So, or if you lose power or you have to land somewhere, and you have to. So you're totally self-contained in that cockpit and the little area behind the cockpit that you can essentially last in that vehicle for days, possibly weeks on end. It's just that that's not asked for or called of very often, but totally a possibility, and they're absolutely built to be able to deal with those contingencies in case you are far, far away from something and you have to land or wait, or, it's going to take a couple of days for someone to get to you based on what other things may be happening. And, that you can float there and you've got auxiliary power and you've got rations and you've got a cot and you got a toilet, and you're not going to crap your suit and start going crazy.
Just an amazing story, Randy, as I'm listening. You're talking and it's mind-boggling because I'm thinking in terms of, as you're talking about starships and cruising the solar system, I mean, it just conjures up thoughts of Star Trek and all of these movies that we've seen, since the 1960s, really, when there was sci-fi before that, obviously, but Star Trek really kicked off the whole starship, galactic types of star travel. It really is an incredible story. Have you had any kind of problems from anybody coming to you and approaching you and telling you to be quiet, shut up, stop talking?
None whatsoever. My chain of command made it very clear when they came to me last August. We've been in communication for a bit longer than that, but when they came to me last August, a year ago August.
How did they come to you?
So I have a micro walkie-talkie in the back of my skull. So not a telepathy implant, but an actual micro walkie-talkie that has a little tiny speaker and a little tiny receptor so that I can sub-vocalize into it. So essentially when someone's talking to me on the micro walkie-talkie, it sounds like someone is talking right behind in the back of my head with like a plastic bucket over their head. It has this kind of like close echo to it. So the first time that happened, it was a very surreal experience, and I was like, thinking, am I hearing things? Am I hearing voices? What's about to happen here? But it was a very surreal experience. So basically, I hear this buzz and then a beep, like a signal coming in beep, and I'm like, where's that beeping sound coming from? It sounds like it's coming from in the back of my skull. It feels like my skull is vibrating. And then I hear very clearly, raise 3 fingers on your left, 2 fingers on your right. Like, what? Raise 3 fingers on your left, 2 fingers on your right. Okay, so 3, 2. Okay, now raise 1 finger on your left, 4 fingers on your right. Okay, 1, 4. Now raise 4 fingers on your left and 4 fingers on your right. Okay, great. You can hear us loud and clear now. We have confirmed clear transmission. And there was a, this is, Command Central, United States Marine Corps Special Section, contacting Captain Randy Allen Cramer, and then I hear the voice of Colonel Jack Jameson, and he says, do you recognize the sound of my voice? I'm like, yes, sir. He's like, am I an officer in your chain of command that is known to you? Yes, sir. Okay, great. Let me put you on, command here with the Brigadier General. And that's when I started talking to Brigadier General Ian Smythe, and he said, so you've been good. We really appreciate that. You've held your secrecy oaths. We appreciate that. We know we'd given you permission to write a book if you'd wanted to write a book. Not exactly saying it was the truth. And I hadn't really gotten on that far. I really hadn't even started writing the book. I'd been so busy just trying to sort of sort my life out, to be honest, that even though I'd been given permission, I hadn't really done much time putting into the book. So by the time that they said, change the story, I really hadn't gotten much done. But I said, I know we've given you permission, to do that. I'm here to ask you if you'd like, it was a request, it was not an order, would you like to go public? And I was just so shocked and taken aback that I would be even being asked this question. I was like, wait, you mean tell the truth? Not like part of it, I mean like tell the truth, the whole truth? And he said, absolutely, correct. And I was flabbergasted. I was like, well, what has brought that on? Why the change? I mean, I was, you're kind of messing with my head here at the last minute. Like, why are you asking me to do this? And we essentially had a lengthy conversation. I won't go into details because it was a lengthy conversation where he informed me of a lot of what was going on and essentially said, look, we're at a situation now where we don't feel like we can any longer make the progress we want to make the progress doing what we're doing. So we have to do something different. And that means we need an officer who is willing to come out and speak publicly. We need it to be an officer because we needed someone who has the legal authority to do that based on the United States Marine Corps Special Section Special Code. We need someone who has an O3 or above authority to do that. We need an officer to do that. And we need someone who can act as a direct source of information and essentially a direct representative of the United States Marine Corps Special Section. And I was informed that when they got around to asking me this, that there had been a list of officers that they were, sort of going down the list of which I was on that list. I don't know who else was on that list. All I can tell you is that it was not a long list. It was a fairly short list, not more than 10 or 20 names on that list. And that over a 6, 8, 9 month period of time, that list got whittled down smaller and smaller until they asked me. So I can't really say, like, what did I do or what was so special about me other than I was on the list. They went through some process to, screen down that list and got to me. Maybe they got down to 3 people and the other 2 they asked were like, screw it, I'm not going to go public. Get some other guy to do it. And I was the one who said yes. I don't know.
Do you have proof of the implant? Do you have a way to be able to validate or confirm that?
I would have to get like some kind of serious scan in my skull to see it. The implants that I have under my ears, like if you were here physically, personally, I could pull back my ear and show you the one under here, and I could take your finger and show you and stick it under this ear, and you could feel this one. So those are my dog tags, and I'm not getting those cut out anytime soon. But I'm told that since I got 2 of them, if I want to get one of them removed, I could. But without, some serious minor surgery and, scans that I don't necessarily feel comfortable with on my head and so forth, I don't have the proof that people would like to see, of that. But like I said, the ones under my ears, if you were here physically, personally, I could absolutely show them to you, take your finger and stick it under there, and you could feel that there was a hard, non-biological, either hard metal or hard plastic object that's round under each earlobe.
Yeah, because I would think, it's just my recommendation for what it's worth, but if you can get that confirmed, that would be a very significant factor with regard to the story.
Well, I was pretty excited for a while, thinking that the work of Dr. Lear, Dr. Richard Lear, was going to, that he's been doing, or had been before he passed away, was sort of the thing, is that, when I first heard of his research, I was like, oh, there's a guy I should contact. And I'd actually sent off an email to him, and I know he got a list of emails from people and wanted to take a look at this stuff. But then he passed away before I could ever talk to him. So I don't know who else is doing that kind of surgery right now. Now I do have my general physician, who is a pretty nice guy, and he's an understanding person. We've talked about this, and I've shown him these, and we've talked about what the process would be if I wanted to pay, essentially come up with the cost for, the microsurgery, daytime surgery room for him to get under here and cut this out. Because I actually went in and was like, look, you can see this one right here. Come on, get a scalpel, get some alcohol, cut it open. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. That wouldn't be medically safe. He's like, but look, if you are serious, you really want, someone to cut in, we'll get, the daytime, microsurgeon, and you have to get the equipment. He says, so it's some money. There's a cost. So in the process of trying to do all of this, as I continue to move forward and continue to gain and resources, I will put them forward to that. And I would be happy to go in and try and get one of these cut out and taken a look at. Both the colonel and the brigadier have suggested to me that if I do, there's a really good chance that you run one of these implants under an electron microscope and you'll be able to read the serial number off of it, which should say USMCSS, 20-digit code. And
Yeah.
that would be an amazing piece of proof, but there's just some stepping stones to getting to that.
Right. Okay. No, fair enough. Fair enough. So, Randy, like I said before, you have been extremely generous with your time. And so I don't want to take up any more. We're pushing 2.5 hours now. But is there anything else you wanted to finish up with?
I'll just say this. It gets easy for people to focus on me and my story when I'm talking and I'm explaining my experiences, because obviously I get it. I'm explaining and laying claim to some amazing, incredible things, and people want to hear that. People want to hear stories. We're a creature who loves stories. We have been telling stories about our collective experiences since time immemorial. So people want to hear the stories. They want to know from the person who was there, and they want to hear about that. I get it. I just want to emphasize, though, that this isn't about me. This isn't about my story. I'm not doing this to get a bunch of personal attention because I want personal attention. I'm not doing this because I want to sell a bazillion books on my story and I want to, make a bazillion dollars off of this. That's not why I'm doing this. I am telling my story to gain attention towards the things that are much more important than me and my story, which are the fact that we have a Mars colony, a lunar space station, a covert military space program, which is collectively holding on to technology which would have all the green energy technology we need, all the clean air, clean water, renewable fuels technology. We would never have to, drill or frack ever again. We would be able to clean all of our water, clean the air. We'd never have to worry about the environmental degradation that we've been going through. We would be able to have a cleaner process for everything. The fact that we have that technology, that it's not like I said, it's not 20 years of investment in R&D to get there. We have it. It's just a matter of getting it from the programs that have it in order to solve those problems. So I'm not here to talk about me, really. I'll tell my story. I'm happy to share. But what I really want to emphasize is I'm here so we can blow the lid off of secrecy. Hello, let's get through disclosure. Let's get there, because then we can actually fix some problems. Then we can actually have clean, green technology. We'll never have to burn fossil fuels again. We'll never have to have another airplane crash ever again, because we won't have jets anymore. We'll have vehicles that are traveling on magnetogravitic propulsion drives that glide through the air safely, fast, and more cheaply. That's the other interesting thing, is that the technology in these programs to build spaceships is actually cheaper than the fuel and building jet engines. The medical technology that can restore damaged limbs and regrow damaged organs is cheaper and less expensive than all of that pharma research and development and all of that making drugs and all of this invasive surgery technology. All this other medical expense that we're spending on is gargantuanly out of control as far as expensive. All this other cheaper, better medical technology is cheaper, faster, easier. So why would we be doing something that's ineffective, expensive, wasteful, polluting, when we have all the options of doing things cleaner, better, cheaper, because we got them. They're just there. We just have to get those programs. So that's the main thing that I'm here to say. It's like, this isn't just about pipe dream. Hey, we should talk about this. Hey, maybe someday. No, we've got this technology. We've got them in these programs. We need to get them to the public sphere so that we can fix the problems. I mean, we wouldn't have to be sitting around fighting and screaming at each other about climate change if we could just fix some of the problems. I'm not saying we could just fix climate change, but we could fix some of the problems that are contributing to that. We could fix some of the pollution problems. We could fix some of the air and water and air quality, ozone layer problems are technologically fixable. So that's one thing. The second thing that is the most important thing is These programs who are acting covertly would like you to believe that they are operating under the covert operations law and that they are legal operating systems of covert military intelligence. This is not the case. They are violating Article 1 of the Constitution. They are violating the Constitution by not answering to the authority of the legislature and the executive branch and the Supreme Court. So by essentially not answering to the legal apparatus of government in this country, they are acting illegally. They are rogue agencies. They are not legal. They are not in the legal authority to say, hey, we can do it wherever we want. They are criminals. So I want to emphasize to every single person who is in the legal legislative, any elected representative who is legally elected in the legal process of law in this country, every officer in a military branch who is operating in a legal operating manner, those are the people who are respecting the Constitution and have the authority, have the absolute legal authority to investigate, confront, and arrest every single person who is acting criminally in these rogue programs. So that's the other thing I want to point out to each and every person. Every military officer in the sound of my voice has to understand your neck is not the most important thing. It is a national security risk that destabilizes the country, the planet, everything if we let these people get away with what they're going to get away with. We are obligated by our oaths as military officers to defend the national security of our country, which is in danger, in great danger. And it is not in danger because of the legal operating system. It is in danger because of this rogue criminal covert system. So we have the technology to fix everything. That's one. It's in these covert programs which are acting illegally. We need to reel that back in. We need to rein that control back in. And the way that we do that is very simple. Every single person who is a legal member, an elected official, member of the legislative, executive branch, who is a legal operating officer in the military, or any branch of the military in the United States, those people not only have the right, the legal right, they have the obligation, the oath-given obligation to sacrifice themselves, their lives, their careers to protect the Constitution and protect sovereignty and defend national security by confronting, investigating, and arresting every single person who's a member of a covert, rogue criminal agency and who's causing the problems. So the people who are doing the right thing have to go after the people who are doing the wrong thing. Then we can get that technology. Then we can start talking about fixing problems and being solution-oriented, which is the whole point of my being having Earth Citizen Consulting, is to consult about being solution-oriented in all of these various problems. How do we get from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things? That's how we do it. Get the technology, arrest the criminals, fix the problems, and be solution-oriented.
Well, excellent, Randy. Excellent message. And I just want to let you know it's been an absolute pleasure having you on